Did you want to come up from the floor again? Oh yeah, there you go. That's perfect. I'm keeping that in.
Do it.
Welcome to Fascinator Studios. We figured out a name. Hey! It may or may not stick. Anyway, I'm Carlene from Standpipe Antiques.
I'm Cassie from PS Relics.
So we have a trunk that we're going to show you how to not necessarily restore, since we're not going to actually put it back into its original condition, but more, we're going to make it look good, still keep the antique feel, but give it a touch up so that it has a protection over all of its surfaces again and will last in this beautiful antique condition for many years to come. Okay.
That's perfect. Breathe new life into it.
Exactly. And breathe new life into it. Okay, so this is a small trunk from pre-1880s. I know that because prior to 1884, this is how the slats across the top of the trunk were. Post-1884, they were this way. I'm not an expert on trunks, so there could be other indications on this trunk that date it better than I can. I just know that that's one of the indications of age, is the direction of the wood slats on the top. Okay, so this trunk is, don't get pulled by the handles. This trunk is really cute. It's actually a mostly metal encased. All of this is metal right here. Across the top is all metal. And the only part that's wood are these actual slats there are a few of them. There's one in the front, one in the back, and then two across the top, and then the bottom. The bottom is wood as well. Okay, and it's got skids. So this has some nice little punched out designs on it, but it's also a little bit rusty. And so I've already taken the liberties of cleaning this so that, and then I'm going to tell you how to clean it. In this particular case, what you're wanting to do is just get all of the dust and stuff off of it. This was a pretty clean trunk, so I didn't have to do much, which is awesome. Do you like cleaning? I don't like cleaning. So
prep is the worst part.
Right? And so all I did was just take a very damp sponge and wash it, rinsed it, washed it. I didn't use any soap. I just used plain water. It also has a paper lining, and the paper lining is actually in pretty decent condition. So it's got, so it's got this back paper here, this nice little image plaque. It's got most of its border left, and even on the very inside of the trunk.
Kind of. Here, let's put it up.
Got it?
There we go.
Yeah, even on the inside of the trunk, a lot of its paper is still there.
Let's see, it's got little pieces coming up in here, and that's what we're going to help fix right there.
Yep. And so this trunk also, by the way, has little tiny wheels on the bottom of it. It's so cute. It also has leather handles that we're going to not remove. We're going to condition to keep them in as good a condition as we can, because the leather handles are not broken. They're not broken, but they're definitely too dry to use. Okay, so that's what we're going to do today. Now, as I said, this trunk's already been scrubbed down and cleaned with a damp cloth. So the next thing that we're going,
Next thing we're going to do, go ahead.
Oh,
no, we're done. No, we're done.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is a light sand. Okay. Now the reason we're doing a light sand is because this trunk has been dirtied and has been used. It is 100 years old, and so to make sure that all the edges are just clean and nice and no splinters and everything else, we're just going to take 400 grit sandpaper. I just have a little board, a little hand sander, and 400 grit sandpaper, and you're not going to get everything off. That's not the purpose of this. It's mostly for the wood. Okay, and we're going to sand the wood gently, and let me show. So before, I'll give you an idea. So that's the wood before. You can see all this kind of grunge on it. We're not going to get all the grunge off. We're just going to make it look pretty. And so the reason you're going to use a 400 grit is that because you're not stripping, you're not trying to strip wood down to its natural, you don't want to use anything higher than 400 grit because you could potentially accidentally take off more than you want. Have you done that before? It's a family show.
I want to say yes, but it's happened.
And so I'll let Cassie take over on this. But so what you want to do is you can take the board off, and I also have new sandpaper over there. Okay. And what you're wanting to do is just kind of make sure that all of the edges have sanded, all of the little bit of this grunge is kind of off because it does this in the center. So yeah, you might have to do that by hand. But that's really all you're doing is just smoothing out the 4 slats of wood. Okay. So I'm going to take this one because I'll need this one for mine. Okay, so the other thing you can also do is 320 would be okay. Did I not bring the 400? 320 is also okay. 320 and 400, there's not that much of a difference. So the other thing that I'm going to do with this is I'm going to sand just a little touch of the metal. And I'm just trying to get the places that have the most rust. But I've got to be really careful because if I sand too much, I'll get shiny. And I don't want shiny. Now I am going to adjust that a little bit later on. But let's just get just a little bit of extra rust off. Okay? And so you literally are just going to do just a light touch on those areas that have just a little too much rust in. So this is what ends up happening. It will be fixed because once we get a little bit of a damp rag on that, all of that rust will go away. I'm actually going to use for this secondary cleaning on this after the sand of the rust, I'm actually going to use a little bit of isopropyl alcohol instead just to make sure that it dries really fast. Got it? Okay, so let's get to sanding bits of this. Yeah, just be careful of the nails that are in this so you don't shine them up.
Bernie, if you're doing this at home, make sure you wear a mask so you don't get these rust particles in your face.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Probably be a good idea to wear some PPE.
Yeah.
Personal protective equipment.
For those that don't know what that is.
You do now. Okay.
We're schooling while with tooling.
Right. That's not gonna fly.
No, I don't think we're gonna be using that, are we?
So they conveniently have 50% isopropyl alcohol spray bottles at your local whatever store that you can find them in, and they're nice. You can refill them with isopropyl in the bottle, but the spray bottle of isopropyl is nice. Just don't breathe it in
like that?
Too closely. And you can damp a rag down and just wipe down those surfaces that you have sanded to get, all the gunk off. And it makes it, the spray bottles of isopropyl make it nice because you don't have, it's a lot easier application. Let's just put it that way.
Not all over your hands, drying them out.
Yep. Not having to accidentally dump the whole bottle all over.
Which I've done.
I haven't. I've never done that. Never done that.
I have 4 kids. You dump stuff.
It's true.
For those of you that don't know and haven't seen them on all of our videos.
Right? It's a gaggle. It's a gaggle of children.
I almost have a baseball team.
I let them have all of them so I don't have any.
Now, many of you avid sanders out there probably have noticed that I'm not doing this flat like you would normally do. This wood has got some bows in it and some interesting little divots, I guess you could call them. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to sand those and leave them in there so it gives them more character, not necessarily because I'm being a really bad sander.
Wanted it to be known that she's not a verbal sander.
Right. Don't avid sanders out there cringe your teeth watching me do this. Doing it wrong. That's why it looks funky.
No, it looks funky. That's why she's doing it wrong. One thing you also need to remember is that when you're doing antiques, you want to remove the abuse, but not the use, okay? And this trunk has a lot of really nice use to it, but there is a couple of spots of abuse, okay? One spot of abuse is right here on the front.
We've just uncovered. Can you see this here?
Yeah.
Yep. Little kicks and dents right there.
That's abuse. That's not use. And so you can use a higher grit sandpaper, a rougher sandpaper. This is 150 grit. You want to try to avoid anything like 80 or 50 or whatever. But this is 150 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to go over this front panel here to get rid of the abuse. No, I'll show them afterwards. Or actually here. So you want to go with the grain of the wood anytime you sand, especially with something as rough as this, so that you see as little of the scratch marks made by 150 grit sandpaper as possible. Now, remember, you don't have to get rid of it completely because your goal isn't to make it look perfect. Your goal is to make it look cool. And so if you notice, what happened is the reason why those marks were there is because this top stain that was on here was scratched. And so what we're going to do is actually continue this look through the whole front piece. We're not going to get all the stain off, but we are going to take the marks of abuse out of it. Okay. So once you have it looking consistent without the abuse marks in it, then you go back over with your 300 or 320 or 400 just to do a light sand to make sure that you get it nice and smooth again. Okay, it doesn't take much. And we are good to go. If I wipe that down, and there you go. It looks, there you go. Okay, so now we have this front panel done. We've got all the wood panels done. I've got all the metal sanded that I want to sand. Now there are some points on this trunk that need to be repaired. They're not major ones on this one. You have a hammer?
Yeah.
But there are a couple of rivets that are out, there's nails that are out, and then there's also a couple metal pieces. Ow. Ow. There are a couple of metal pieces that need to be bent back into shape as well. The first one is this corner right here. This nail is sticking out. Actually, I don't know why. And so I'm going to hold the trunk while gently, because you don't want to hit the hammer on the trunk itself. So if you get one of those screwdrivers, they also make special tools for this, but we don't indulge in that excess here. Yeah, and then you use a screwdriver or a nail tap or something like that, and this.
Don't use this for this. This is not what this is made for. Carlene does not come prepared today with the tools she needs for this project.
I couldn't find the nail tap, so and you just use a nail tap in order to put the nail back in, and that way you don't damage you don't get this nice half circle round of nails as you miss, especially when you miss it several times and then you have these little hammered sections.
Instead of having normal metal, you have hammered metal, which I guess you could do if you really wanted to.
But then you'd have to do the whole trunk. Remember, we're looking for consistency here. Okay, so then the next piece of business is there was one. Oh, there's one here. Where was it? There's a little piece of metal that was out. Can't I find it?
Cut that out.
Yeah, we'll have to. It is somewhere.
Oh, here's one.
Ah, yes, there it is. Okay, so Cassie just pounded in one of the little metal flaps that was out on the inside. So you want to go through all the metal edges and make sure the metal edges are in and there's none of the edges poking out, because if you're going to use this trunk, you don't want to reach in and just, have to go to the hospital every time you get a toy out or something. Yeah, you get tetanus shots all the time. Although,
You only need one every 7 years.
I know.
You didn't know you were getting a medical show too, did
right?
you?
Yeah, so here's a little bit, there's a little bit on here. And so you just gently hammer the edges of the metal back in. Don't go all He-Man on it. It doesn't require that. corner. Just the top.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, the top. There you go.
There, that's better.
Yeah. Okay, so that looks like that's good on the metal, and it's all wiped back down. I didn't check to make sure your hands weren't in there.
It's okay. I moved them.
So that, we've got the back all done. We've got everything wiped down, and it is actually ready for the preservation rather than the cleanup, because we're done with the cleanup.
It smells like conditioner. I mean, I know it is. I mean, like, this is Chinese conditioner.
Welcome back.
Hi.
So one of the other steps that needs to be done in this is to condition the leather handles. Now, there are all sorts of leather conditioners out there, and we can use this to try to get the leather to at least come back to a little bit of its formerly supple nature. Again, it's not going to be perfect. So all you do with this,
It's made in China.
made in China.
It smells like conditioner
And
for
it's
your hair.
hard. So you want to try to, there it comes up.
Oh, man.
What? Yeah? Yeah,
The viewers will understand.
I'll listen to the video later. Glue on my fingers.
Time to condition.
So here's the, say so a lot. I usually edit most of them out. Here's the leather conditioner on the pad, and we're just going to
Maneuver this over so you can see what we're doing. Yeah. I'm gonna lower it down a little bit. There we go.
There you go. Okay, so we're just going to gently work it into the leather. And you're going to have to do this, 3 or 4 times because of the age of the
strap
itself. But you're going to want to do this, and then you move on to something else, and then you come back and do this again until you can kind of get starting to come, some of the dirt and debris and stuff is coming off.
Well, that looks mighty fine. I can't really see the difference in it on the video, but
got to carefully get underneath the strap. So that's what you do, and as I said, you let it sit, and then you come back. And really, the whole purpose is to kind of make it look really nice. Even if you don't get it back to the point of supple, you want it to at least look good. Now that we've got the handles conditioned, at least the first layer of them conditioned, we're going to do the black glaze on the metal. There's a couple of different reasons to do that. One, this metal was originally painted black to begin with, and it's lost a lot of that color. You don't have to do it if you prefer it to be all brown, but the other reason is I'm trying to differentiate between the wood and the metal just a little bit stronger. And I don't want to do some light coat on the wood when I can put the metal back to closer to the original color that it used to be in. And so we're just going to use a black glaze and just go over really lightly with that over the metal. So when it comes to the black glazes, Dixie Belle has a nice black glaze that you can use on this. It is also water-based, and you can use the sponge method. In this case, you just put a little bit of the black glaze on your sponge. Make sure it's not too heavily coated, because you're not trying to paint the piece, you're just trying to glaze it. And you only want to go over the metal parts, which in this case are the majority of the trunk.
You can kind of see here the different colors in that.
So we got a little bit of glaze on the wood that we had just beautifully sanded, which is fine because that happens. That's why you can actually sand the wood after you do the glaze, although I don't like doing that because then you get dust everywhere. But since I didn't tape off the wood, I have to do just a touch of sanding. And you have to be careful with this because you don't want to get dust on all your beautiful glaze. So I've wetted down the wood just a touch where the glaze wood to get to wipe off as much of the glaze as I possibly can. And then I'm just going to go over it just enough to get that glaze off. It's a little bit wet, so it's sticking mostly to everything else besides dusting. And that's it. And you do that on a couple of spots. You got a little bit of glaze. Glaze on the side of the wood isn't bad. It kind of gives it character. If you can avoid it, the best way to avoid it is tape if you want to tape it off. Okay. Otherwise, you can always make it blend it in and give it that little extra touch of character, and you're good to go. Okay, so now we have to let it dry.
Yep, that's where we're at.
All right. Okay, we're back. The glaze is dried. You can already see that it's a nice, darker, rich color. It's protected. As I said, I'm going to do a coat of gator hide, which won't change the color any, but I'm going to do a coat of gator hide over the whole thing, just to make sure that nothing is going to damage for the next, however many years.
However many.
So the next thing we're going to do is to protect the wood, and we're going to use boiled linseed oil for that.
Boiled linseed oil, not oiled linseed oil, because that's kind of what it sounded like she said.
Sorry, it's a pry offer. Where's screwdrivers? Where do we put
And
first place I need to look is the
may not say much, but I know where stuff is.
Boiled linseed oil.
There we go.
Okay, now I don't have scissors back here. So this is one of those things that it's an oil, and so we're just going to use a piece of this towel, and it's just like anything else on the glaze and everything else. You put a touch on, not too much.
It's yellow.
It is yellow.
Don't be scared. Looks like sunflower oil.
So that's what it looks like. Looks like vomit.
But it's not. You can't eat it. Don't eat that.
And you just work it in a towel so you don't have too much on the surface. And then you just rub it over your wood. And rub it in. And you have to reapply the boiled linseed oil to the towel a couple of times. So I'm going to let Cassie McCasterson take over.
Rubbing oil on the wood.
Yes. You're much more experienced at that than I am.
I mean, can you guys see that? That is awesome.
And so this will soak into the wood and put a couple applications on there, and it will harden up, and it'll just make it glow, and it'll just be really pretty. And just make that wood just last. Family show. Need I remind you?
I said not a gosh darn word.
Need I remind you the Snickers are not needed here.
So one thing I learned about Carlene is she likes voices a lot.
Yes.
She does different voices often, and most of them are really good.
Aw, just most of them?
Okay, almost all of them.
It's true. It's very true.
I learned French today because of her, so there you go.
So while she's lubing up the wood, I'm going to do the gator hide glaze over the metal. Using the Dixie Belle sponge, I spooned on some of the gator hide, and I'm just going to work it into the sponge. And this way you don't get transfer of color into your gator hide if you're not putting the sponge directly into the gator hide. And so once I have it worked into the gator hide, I just do like I was doing before, and I just coat quickly and efficiently because it dries nice linear lines so you don't have any swirl showing. And don't forget to get the inside edge of that metal so that it is also as well protected as the outside. So one thing to watch out for is when you're doing anything that has ridges like this, make sure you get all the way around them, because otherwise you'll have a halo and it won't be fully protected.
Peekaboo!
She has kids. Remember this, people. So when you put the linseed oil on it, it is going to stay dark like that because that's part of the, when you get wood wet or anything like that, it darkens. The only way to get it lighter is by putting on like a white wax or a lighter colored wax or stain, something to kind of pickle the piece. I don't want to do that with this piece because it's not really how it looked to begin with. It still has, because of the black glazing, it differentiated the body from the wood sufficiently that it still looks really good, nice and rich, without it being, but you can paint the wood a color. It would probably look really good if you painted it some color. You can also, as I said, wax it a different color. So you've got all sorts of different choices, but in this particular case, we're leaving it as close to original as possible. Now the hard place to do this is right underneath the leather handles. You're not going to get them perfect underneath those leather handles. You just want to get as much as you can see because that way it's not visible that you don't have the underside fully coated. You can also use your finger a little bit just to kind of get on the inside of that and at least just kind of make some of that disappear, and that'll hide the fact that you weren't able to fully get underneath the handles. So the leather conditioner has soaked in, and so Cassie's going to condition the handles again. So this piece has been boiled linseed, leather condition on the handles. We've gator hided the top, black glazed it and gator hided it, and it is almost done. But we still have one thing left, and that's the inside. Now I was talking earlier about damping the inside and seeing if the wheat paste reactivated, and unfortunately in this particular case it did not. But there's another thing you can do, okay? You can take all the paper out, and some of this paper is going to have to come out because we can't salvage it. But one of the methods of getting this to stick back down, and it is a more arduous process, unfortunately, is to take pieces that you can, and what you do, I've got a little glue in here. In this particular case, I'm using wood glue since I have sufficient of it, but you could probably use Elmer's. You just don't want to use a paste glue or a super glue. And what you do is you take one of the pieces and you lift up the edge. If you'll get that edge for me.
Oh, that's the actual piece of it. That's what was
Yeah. So let's take, and so we have this piece here, and we're going to put the glue all, use the brush to go all the way underneath it, and then tap it down, and then use a wet sponge, not a wet sponge, a damp sponge. Okay, you use a damp sponge, and you just kind of go over the top, and you wet it down just a touch, and get the excess glue off, and then it'll dry, and it will glue those pieces down. And you do that through the whole piece until you have all the pieces of paper down that you want to be down, and then you just polycoat or use a gator hide. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to show you guys that since it's an arduous process, but when it is done, it'll look just like this. Okay, a little shinier, but it'll look just like this. The outside of the trunk was really the cool thing. Plus, the gator hide will also protect the wood on the inside, and it'll just make it look amazing. So that is how to protect a trunk. At least that's one method of how to protect a trunk that has metal and wood on it. You can do all sorts of different things. You can paint them, chalk paint them. You can strip them down. You can recoat them and make them look like they're brand spanking new. I wanted this one to look like it had age to it, but yet still be protected. And that's, I think, what we did successfully. So thank you for watching.
Have another happy customer. Y'all have a good night. We're going to have sound.
What would you do? Oh, I know what the trunk dance would be. It'd be the badunkadunk.
Dunk.